Greetings everyone, my name is Dr. Jason Freeman. I'd like to welcome y'all to my channel. The book Things Fall Apart is about the life and struggles of Okonkwo, an Igbo leader of the village of Umuofia, which would be in present-day Nigeria. Well, on the surface, the book may appear to be just another really good African story. I think its significance goes way deeper. It provides a blueprint for how colonization worked during that period and how it still works today. The book begins by showing us a glimpse of Africa prior to European colonization. It's a time when Africans practice their own religions, speak their own languages, control their own lives, and don't look at themselves through the lens of Europeans. And where the real power of the book lies, and why I think it should be required reading, is that it shows how from this community where Africans are in charge, we see the introduction of these European institutions and essentially setting up colonization. In particular, we see how the influence of Christianity, or the imposition of Christianity on these communities, essentially undermined the native religions of these Africans. Once African religions were denigrated and supplanted, it undermined the power of African leaders, in particular African religious leaders. And once the power of these African leaders, both secular and religion, though at the time it really was there was no real separation of church and state. Once you undermine the power of these African leaders, that's when they were replaced by European institutions like European religion as well as European political structures. And of course that leads to colonization, where essentially you have these foreign powers coming in and imposing their will on these communities with the whole goal of exploiting resources, which again is something we still see today. The book best illustrates this process through the relationship of Okonkwo and his son Nwoye. Now, not to spoil anything from the book, Okonkwo does something that definitely does not fit with our modern Western values. And so his son Nwoye has a negative view of him and relationship with him as a result. He essentially joins with European missionaries who recruit local Africans into Christianity. And so through that we see the undermining of Okonkwo's authority in the eyes of Nwoye. Now, to go further with this, I have to give some spoilers for the end of the book. So if you've already been convinced to go ahead and read it or reread it, go ahead and click off the video now. You've been warned. At the end of the book, Okonkwo kills himself rather than to be the subject of this European power. And his life and story basically is to be included in a book titled The Pacification of the Primitive Tribes of the Lower Niger. And so in this moment, it is revealed that all of the efforts, including the recruitment of young people like Nwoye into European religions and European structures, essentially was an effort to undermine the power structure and to allow the European powers to come in and take over villages like Umuofia. In the Americas, many powerful indigenous communities were essentially wiped out by diseases like smallpox. Now, once that happened, European powers could come in and essentially defeat these weakened civilizations militarily. And when that happened, they can essentially colonize and impose their power on these areas. Now, because of centuries of contacts between Europeans and Africans, basically the diseases, Africans had immunity to European diseases. So the only way that you could kind of come in and colonize in that way is you had to undermine the kingdoms that existed there. These were powerful kingdoms, and for centuries, up until the end of the 19th century, Europeans couldn't necessarily make inroads into the interior to conquer these different civilizations. And so you had a two-pronged approach. First, you had depopulation through slavery, so essentially making deals with African kingdoms to buy off people, which was very lucrative. Now, over the centuries, it worked to essentially take away young, strong people and bring them to the Americas, again, weakening these kingdoms. On the other side, what we see in Things Fall Apart is you had essentially these European powers come into these kingdoms, setting up their own religions, undermining the power structures there, and essentially over time eventually conquering these powerful kingdoms. Another good analogy is the classic Twilight Zone episode To Serve Man. In it, these powerful aliens come bringing these great technology and this great quote-unquote progress with the basic desire to essentially consume humans. So essentially turning them into cattle.
This is flight number 914 from Earth to our planet. We will be taking off in 3 minutes.
Mr. Chambers! Mr. Chambers! Don't get on that ship! The rest of the book, To Serve Man, it's a cookbook!
No! 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 Ah! No! No!
And so the book lays all that out. And so the result of all these processes that we see within the book is essentially what we see with the Berlin Conference of 1884 and 1885, where European powers have basically undermined the power structure within Africa, and now they're starting to carve it up, creating a lot of nations like Nigeria that we still see existing today. And the tactics used when things fall apart were not just isolated to the African continent. We also see it within the Americas in regards to people of African descent. So during the Civil War, many Africans took up arms to essentially fight back against the Confederacy. So in many ways, you could think of Africans liberating themselves, with the epitome being Juneteenth, where you had these black soldiers going into Texas and liberating the last Africans who were under enslavement. Now, after this time, many African Americans gained political power. The black people had to vote for the first time, and so you're starting to see the inroads of these kind of different black institutions. HBCUs were also established during this time. But what happened is, with the Great Compromise of 1877, you saw that laws were put into place to disenfranchise black people, basically take away the vote. So grandfather clauses, also literacy tests, and Jim Crow was put into place so that black people could not have positions of power within white Southern society. And so just like we saw with Algonquin, again, the powerful black people were essentially undermined, taken out of political power, and therefore Africans or people of African descent were now at the whims of the white power structure. After the successes of the Civil Rights Movement with the Voting Rights Act, the Fair Housing Act, the Civil Rights Act, we then saw essentially the rise of the war on drugs. Now, of course, it was under the guise of kind of being tougher on crime, but looking at the book, The New Jim Crow, we see that basically drug use was not higher within black and brown communities. Also, there was not a significant increase in drug use during that time. And it was later revealed by Nixon's domestic policy chief, John Erickson, that the war on drugs was a guise to go after two groups Nixon saw as threats: African Americans and hippies. And in the 21st century, we see these tactics used again. So after the election of 2020, where essentially African Americans were a key group who helped to push back Trump and the MAGA Republicans, we start to see more voter ID laws. We start to see an increased push to disenfranchise nonviolent drug offenders who are disproportionately black because of unfair policing within black communities. We also see attacks on DEI, as well as attacks on the teaching of black history, in particular in southern schools, where, again, you have majority black populations. And so it is pivotal that we read books like Things Fall Apart, because essentially it gives us the keys to the game. It shows us what's really going on. That these efforts are going to happen. They've happened in the past. They'll continue to happen whenever people of color essentially exercise our power. And so Things Fall Apart reminds me that we have to fight. Even if we're called race baiters, even if we are told that we are causing the problem. Because power concedes nothing without demand, never has, never will. So that comes from Frederick Douglass. And so to remind us that we do have to push back, that we do have to fight if we want to continue to be able to vote, continue to have a say in our society, then we have to push back against these intentional efforts to undermine our power. If you found that video interesting and or informative, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. Also, please share this video. And if there are other books like Things Fall Apart that you want me to talk about on this channel, please leave those suggestions in the comment section below. Thank you all for your time and have a wonderful rest of your day.